everyone. So my name is Jen Scheidler, and I'm the Strategic Planning and Operations Manager at the World Trade Center Institute. And on behalf of WTCI, I'd like to welcome you to our third session of the AGILE 2021 Innovation Series, Innovations in Protecting the World's Water Supply. So before we begin our program, I would like to recognize several companies who make the AGILE series possible. Our visionary sponsor, Todd Rupert International, our platinum sponsors, RSM and JP Morgan Chase, as well as our gold sponsors, Japigo, Ports America Chesapeake, Stanley Black & Decker, Hogan Lovells, and Tesco Technologies. Thank you so much for your continued support. So for those of you joining us today who are new to WTCI, our organization aims to empower our members with new ideas and valuable connections. Programs like Agile kick off meaningful conversations that explore innovative ideas. So we hope to inspire these conversations between our members and guests through all our programs, covering a wide variety of topics that are developed with and for international business professionals. The best way to connect with Maryland's largest international business network is through WTCI membership. We help our members share their knowledge and expertise and offer them a wide range of global business services and connections. So to learn how you might benefit from membership with the World Trade Center Institute, please contact our Senior Manager of Business Development and Membership, Lydia Yodi, at lydia@wtci.org. So we have a great session for you today with top experts who will discuss sustainability, climate change, and how it relates to water. Today, you'll hear from JaLeesa Tate, who's the State Hazard Mitigation Officer at the Maryland Emergency Management Agency, Mark Bryer, who is the Chesapeake Bay Program Director at the Nature Conservancy, and Toni McCrory, who is the Senior Director of Environmental Health and Safety Compliance at Walmart. So the session is moderated by Bruce McIndoe, who's the founder of McIndoe Risk Advisory and WTCI board member. Bruce is a recognized leader, author, and speaker in the areas of global risk management, technology, and intelligence. Formerly, he was a founder of WorldAware, which was recently acquired by GardaWorld, a leading provider of global intelligence. And he has been in the industry of creating and putting into practice the concept of integrated risk management to protect people, sites, supply chain, and information assets for global organizations. Prior to WorldAware, Bruce worked at the NSA, the CIA, the Department of Defense, and NASA. And throughout Bruce's career, water security and associated risks have continued to increase. He's passionate and knowledgeable about water, the risks of water scarcity, and the urgency required to solve this global issue. So at the end of the presentations today, he will lead the panel discussion and take live questions from the audience. So please welcome Bruce McIndoe, who will provide an overview of the session and topic.
Thanks a lot, Jen.
Thanks, Bruce.
And welcome, everyone. I guess the older you are, the longer your introduction is. So I want to just start out with a few slides to kind of set the context about water and just some facts around how important it is to us. And when you live on a big blue marble that 2/3 is covered with water, you don't think about not having water. But the reality is that only about 1% of the water on this planet will sustain us. So as far as having fresh water for drinking and all the things that we need, that's it, 1%. So it is an incredibly important resource and one that is being incredibly stressed across the planet. And you can see even here in the United States, and in fact, in the Southwest United States right now, we're actually in a severe drought, extended drought period. And so we have, challenges that are in front of us today. I mean, if you look at the top 10 cities that are, essentially running out of water, we've had several like Cape Town that literally was weeks away from having to shut off all of their municipal water supply to all of their citizens. That's a critical and crisis condition that's going to start cascading as we move more and more into water scarcity. So where is the water going? The majority of the water, 70%, goes to agriculture. And we've talked in this series about the various approaches to kind of reducing agricultural use of water. And so that's really where the biggest return, only about 11% of the water that we withdraw is used for municipal purposes, which is obviously a very small amount for food consumption and water for us. And then a lot of it's showers and toilets and everything else. But at the end of the day, this is an existential threat. You know, we don't live very long without water. And so when countries don't have access to water, it can create friction and wars, or when people don't have water, they're going to migrate to where water is, and nation state boundaries don't matter. And so it's incredibly important for our survivability. It's very important for stability, and it's very important to every single person on the planet. So we've had, this is the third part in this 4-part series. These are all available in recordings on YouTube. We talked about water and human health in part 1. We talked about management and conservation of water at the building and home level, all the way to a global scale. So what are people actually doing? Very interesting session. Today, we're going to talk about, you know, climate change, water, and bring it closer to home here in the you know, kind of Maryland, greater Maryland area, and drainage to the Chesapeake Bay. And we'll conclude the session on May 19th with our part 4, which is looking at water risk and also to getting activism around protecting and conserving water. So with that, I'm going to introduce JaLeesa, who's with the Maryland Emergency Management Agency. She's the State Hazard Mitigation Officer and branch manager for the agency. Her primary focus is to identify and implement risk reduction strategies to build resilience across the entire state of Maryland. This is achieved through her building partnerships across many sectors to provide multidisciplinary solutions for the stakeholders and Maryland communities, which are us. So JaLeesa, I'll leave it to you.
All right, thank you so much, Bruce, for the introduction and ultimately for the opportunity to join you all and speak with you today as well too. So the topic of water is something that's personally and professionally very near and dear to me. So I'm really excited to join in on this conversation and also provide kind of like a perspective of what we've been doing as a state and more particularly at the Maryland Emergency Management Agency when it comes to addressing climate change and our water issues as well too that Bruce just covered. So today I really wanted to focus on how do we move forward with a lot of our mitigation initiatives by building public-private partnerships. So those are the three P's that we're really discussing today. So at MEMA, a lot of times when you think about emergency management or emergency managers, those are not the individuals at the forefront that you think of when you are thinking about how do we address climate change. And as Bruce kind of just discussed, a lot of the cascading issues that we are beginning to experience and will ultimately experience from climate change, it does in fact make climate change a public safety issue that emergency managers have to begin prioritizing as well too. So at MEMA, although our main function, I would say, is to serve in a coordination role for the state, a lot of that coordination is also ensuring that all the players that we need at the table to start effectively addressing climate change are there. So within MEMA, we have a risk reduction directorate. And our focus is really to take this like multi-pronged approach to how we are addressing our risk and our vulnerabilities at the state level. So we have our hazard mitigation program. So a lot of times that is focused a lot on in the ground construction projects. And we utilize FEMA's hazard mitigation assistance grant programs a lot for that. So that's one avenue. We're also getting really involved in looking at how we can shape legislation and policy to also aid in our efforts. So recently at the state of Maryland, this legislative session, there were several climate focused bills. Some of the ones that turned out really positive were for a revolving loan fund to be created within the state that would focus on resilience projects. So again, creating these dedicated sources of funding that we really need within the state. And then also looking at federal legislation and policy as well too. Partnerships are a huge part of our solutions. And so in a second in the presentation, I'll also discuss the importance of addressing climate change and resiliency from a what we call a whole community perspective, where every single person in the community, from the individual up to large global corporations, play an integral part in the way that we are addressing climate change. Education and outreach. So we have to ensure that people know what their risks are, they know what their vulnerabilities are, and then that they also know how to adequately prepare and address those risks and vulnerabilities too. And then a really large part of what we do is the risk analysis. So as of lately, I've been having a lot of conversations with people saying, hey, about 20 years ago, when we were having these conversations about climate change, we were always saying, oh, well, this is what the 2050 projections say. And we're in 2021 now, so we're halfway to those projections. And so we really have to start, I think, as a society, reevaluating us saying, well, okay, we're doing the studies and this is what the projections look like. And we're already experiencing and being impacted by a lot of these changes. And so we have to ensure that as much as we're doing the risk analysis, we're also using that data to make very informed decisions about adaptation as well too, so that we do start to actually address the issues. So again, we try and take a very comprehensive multidisciplinary approach to risk reduction at MEMA, and I feel that this is really true across the entire state as well too. So the whole community aspect of it. So when we say whole community, again, we really mean the individuals, all levels of government, the non-government sector, so private, nonprofit, faith-based organizations, literally everyone. And the reason that that's so important is that all of us share this risk, right? So as an individual, you will experience impacts from climate change. As a private sector entity, you will also experience impacts from climate change. And so with that, we truly believe that all of us, we share this collective responsibility to, again, effectively make sure that we're addressing these risks as well too. A big piece of the puzzle is ensuring that our critical infrastructure and critical facilities are protected during emergency situations. So whether those are natural hazards or man-made threats, our goal is always to ensure that our communities can continue operating at a certain level during an emergency. Well, the private sector owns a lot of that critical infrastructure and facilities. So just very clear off the bat right there, we really have to ensure that we are effectively working with the private sector and building these partnerships so that ultimately we can increase the resilience of our communities. Subject matter expertise. So again, I like to say that one person or one entity does not have all of the answers. So yes, like we have very dedicated resources within state government to evaluate mitigation, resiliency, coastal adaptation, and so much more. But we also recognize and also want to make sure that we reach out to other areas. So whether that is, again, private sector, nonprofit, academia, we recognize the importance of making sure we develop solutions that are multidisciplinary and that go across sectors as well too. And then for me, professionally and personally, the really important thing for me is making sure that we are investing in projects that have multiple benefits. So Bruce was mentioning kind of like the cascading effects of our water issues that we're having. So like, although my program focuses primarily on water quantity, that's not to say that we can't take that investment and look at the co-benefits as well too, and see if there are opportunities for water quality improvement or habitat improvement and other things. So I like to really take the kind of two birds, one stone approach, and ultimately just making sure that we're making very thought out and informed investments across the board when we are implementing mitigation projects within the communities. So then how does the private sector really fit into this puzzle, right? So I kind of hit on already the importance of making sure we're engaging with the private sector in terms of protecting critical infrastructure and critical facilities. So there are lots of opportunities to partner and collaborate. And we recognize that a lot and put into practice a lot throughout our COVID-19 response. So whether that was partnering with private entities to get PPE resources or to help with donations and volunteer management, we recognize the importance of having the private sector engaged in our emergency response and mitigation efforts. The private sector, we also have to, again, bring them into the conversation because the private sector does have unique challenges and needs. And ultimately, there's a lot more flexibility within the private sector than there is in the government sector as well, too. So for instance, a lot of times within the government sector, we might have a lot of timelines or different things like that that we have to adhere to. And so it's really important for us that immediately after some type of emergency or disaster, that ultimately the community is getting the resources that they need. And so in some instances, our private sector partners are able to start putting resources into a community quicker than we might be able to on the government side of things. And then ultimately, as a private entity, you are such an important member of the communities that you serve. And again, coming from that whole community perspective, we really want to make sure that we're engaging every single person within these communities so that the projects that we ultimately identify and implement, that they actually serve and benefit everybody. So again, whole community approach. Right. And then, so what really has Maryland been doing? What are the things that are kind of like I say, Maryland in action? So number one, we've partnered with the Nature Conservancy to do different outreach and education events. So really those are multi-partner events and kind of initiatives. So really going into communities, developing materials that are specific to those communities. And then we have our Maryland Business Emergency Operations Center. So again, bringing the private sector into the COVID-19 response and recovery efforts. So that is included ensuring that our private sector has situational awareness about these efforts, and then also how they can actually support different initiatives throughout the state. All right. So ultimately, how can you get involved and get engaged? So there are just two quick opportunities I'd like to highlight. So the first one is FEMA's Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Grant Program, which is BRIC. So that focuses a lot on innovation, which is something that we really are looking forward to. The partnerships, and of course, focusing on large scale, complex infrastructure projects. And then the second program is going to be MEMA's Private Sector Integration Program. So that program serves as a dedicated resource for the private sector to get involved with everything emergency management with the state of Maryland. So for the BRIC program, I am the contact for that. And then for the PSIP program, Allegra Tartaglia is the contact for that program. And so with that, again, thank you so much for this opportunity. And I'm happy to take questions during the panel later.
Thanks, JaLeesa. Really awesome to see what Maryland's doing and the investments that they're making. I'd like to introduce the next speaker with the Nature Conservatory. It's Mark Bryer. He leads the Chesapeake Bay program with them. The Bay program is focused on improving water quality and building climate resiliency in North America's largest estuary. Trained as a civil engineer and ecologist, Mark's worked around the world on issues related to water, biodiversity, conservation, and other things. He lives with his family in Arlington, Virginia. And Mark, I'll let you share your presentation and take it from there.
Thank you, Bruce, so much. Good morning, everybody. Appreciate the introduction, Bruce, and to WTCI for the opportunity to speak with you this morning. I'm going to build on a number of the topics that JaLeesa just spoke to you about. As Bruce mentioned, I work for the Nature Conservancy. If you don't know about us, we're the world's largest environmental nonprofit. We work all over the world, in fact, in more than 70 countries, and for more than 4 decades in Maryland and around the Chesapeake Bay, which is a lot of the work that I do nowadays. Our work in Maryland, I'll just take a moment to orient you to that. We do quite a bit of work really focused on clean water and climate change, as Bruce mentioned, in a number of different ways. In the western part of the state on forest restoration and management, in the Appalachian Mountains, in the Baltimore and Washington, DC area, really looking at stormwater issues. And actually Toni from Walmart's going to talk about an amazing partnership, thanks to their leadership that we've been fortunate to be part of. We work around the Bay, really looking at climate change and important habitats in the shorelines of the Bay, like around marshes and oysters. And then finally, working on sustainable agriculture. And given our theme today of water and climate, I could really dive in on any of these topics, but I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about agriculture, given JaLeesa's expertise and Toni's expertise to make it a little bit more of a broad conversation. We'll dive into the topic of agriculture for a bit and tell you a little bit about why it's so important in the Chesapeake here. So it is, in this region, it's the dominant land use. There's dominant human land use. It is really important for our economy in the Mid-Atlantic, a driving element of economic activity in all the Mid-Atlantic states that drain into the Chesapeake. And in fact, culturally iconic, very important for who we are as communities in a lot of these states. Additionally, however, it is also the largest source of pollution into the Chesapeake Bay. And the satellite image shows you what happens after a large storm, not just because of agriculture, but because of urban runoff, but primarily because of agriculture. Runoff that carries nutrients, excess nutrients and sediments. And what those excess nutrients and sediments do is really cause harm to the Bay, cause harm to the communities on the Bay that depend upon it. Challengingly, on top of that, that's a problem that's been happening for 40, 50, 60 years now that many people have been working on. Climate change is making that even more difficult. And this infographic, if you will, just gives you a sense on what happens as climate change is occurring, particularly over the last decade or two, and increasingly we see in the models, increases in precipitation, both in amount and frequency and intensity, causing more flooding, causing more erosion and runoff, perhaps causing summer droughts. These are all really important factors for the Bay that have real implications for the health of the Bay. At the same time, I'll just point your eye to the lower left-hand corner here. What's happening with agriculture and that industry? Climate change is adding a lot of uncertainty for farmers nowadays. It's really, Bruce talked about irrigation. We're fortunate, at least historically, to have a fair amount of water in this region, and there's not a lot of irrigation, but that's changing. There are more and more farmers moving to irrigation, and that can cause water stress with other communities. Challenges with crop and livestock stress, shorter growing seasons, all of these compound impacts associated with agricultural operations in our region. So we need agriculture not just for food, of course, but also for clean water and for climate change. A lot of the practices that I'm going to talk about can help build resilience to climate change, can help store carbon in soils. And so there's a win-win here, if you will. So that's kind of a bit of a dour story, and I want to change it a little bit to say that at least from where I sit, there's real hope here. There's real good news to celebrate. As I mentioned, for 40 plus years, a very broad collective effort that includes many farmers has been working to provide cleaner water into the Chesapeake. And the good news is it's actually working. We're getting cleaner water in the bay. And that's a pretty remarkable thing given the fact that over the last 40 years, there's about 50% more people living in the Chesapeake watershed. So that's a pretty remarkable thing to get cleaner water along the way. Now, I don't want to be too Pollyannish about it. We actually have a really long way to go. We're only about halfway towards our clean water goals. But the really good news is we actually know what we need to do. We know the solutions, and the key is to really just implement them at scale. In agriculture, this really means turning to regenerative solutions. And this term regenerative is focused on one that actively restores nature, maybe in crop fields themselves, maybe adjacent to crop fields, and really continues to provide agricultural production, but actually makes the environment better. It's not just sustainability, it's actually a step beyond that. So I just want to give you a few examples of when I say regenerative, what do I mean by that? One example is cover crops. So in our region, most of the crops that are grown are corn and soybeans and wheat. Cover crops are crops that are grown, say grasses or other types of plants that are grown in between those cash crops. And they help to soak up excess nutrients. They help to hold water. They really build healthy soils, a very important part of agricultural practices. Another is precision fertilizer application. This is a schematic that shows what the technology nowadays is capable of if we can get it in the hands of farmers to really precisely apply fertilizers so that plants use all of it and very little of it, if any, runs off the fields, ends up in our streams and ultimately the bay. A third example is wetland and floodplain restoration. At the edges of farm fields, in some case in farm fields where there are parts that are just wet and don't typically produce a lot of crops, there are opportunities to convert those back to natural habitats and really, from a financial standpoint, benefit farmers, but at a broader societal impact, store floodwaters, reduce nutrients and the like. There are many other examples of practices, dozens of them like these. We call them climate smart practices. They improve water quality in the bay, but they also do a really important thing for the climate. They help to store carbon in the soils, and they also hold water. So that increased precipitation that we're seeing so frequently right now, looking out my window and seeing it raining, that increased precipitation, these different practices help to hold water and prevent it from creating floods downstream. So great news, right? The bay is getting better. We still have a long way to go. We know what the solutions are. What's in the way? From where I sit, what's in the way is scale. This is a really big watershed. This is a map of the Chesapeake drainage. Anything inside this white line here flows into the Chesapeake. There are 83,000 farmers in the Chesapeake watershed. We have great examples in every state of farmers using the kind of practices that I mentioned, but the challenge is not enough of them are using them to get to clean water and climate resilience goals that have been set. To date, government and philanthropic engagement has been super important. It will continue to be super important, but we really need the private sector for engagement if we're going to get to the scale that we need. That means increasing sustainability of supply chains. It means helping farmers manage risk. It means building demand for regenerative practices. I'm going to quickly share two examples of what's possible when you have that kind of private sector engagement. The first is along the Pocomoke River. This is the largest river on the Eastern Shore, starts in Delaware and drains through the Eastern Shore of Maryland and out into the bay here. And this is a really interesting river. It was channelized about 50 years ago. And that channelization really prevents the river from treating the nutrients, the excess pollution that comes down it. And it also is not very good at storing floodwaters. So the Nature Conservancy, working with many partners, has worked on a restoration project over the last 5+ years and is continuing to work on this project. Thousands of acres restored, almost 20 miles of this river being put back in place. It's the largest restoration project of its type in Maryland's history. And in this case, Tom's of Maine was an essential private sector partner in this. They, because of their commitment to water sustainability, contributed funds that leveraged millions of state and federal dollars to help essentially break down that channelization that I mentioned and allow floodwaters, as shown in this aerial photo here, to go back out onto the forests, allow pollution to settle out, allow floodwaters to be stored. A second example shows how businesses that are engaged in agriculture can really be partners with farmers. So in this case, agribusinesses, companies that sell seed and fertilizer, are trusted advisors to those farmers, and their successes, the companies and the farmers themselves, are intimately linked. So the Nature Conservancy helped build alliances of these agribusinesses, dozens and dozens of companies, to help educate farmers about the economic and the environmental benefits of these regenerative practices that I discussed before, and help expand funding opportunities for farmers to adopt those practices. To date, these alliances have helped implement more than 70,000 acres of practices, regenerative practices across the Bay watershed. We want to increase that dramatically in the next 5 years. So just a few more slides here to share. You know, one of the things I love about working for the Nature Conservancy, I mentioned we're a global organization, and that's a learning network for us, for me and my colleagues, to learn from what are we doing in the Midwest, what are we doing in Brazil, what are we doing in China, but it's also an opportunity from a corporate engagement standpoint where corporations work on similar footprints to learn from one another. So let me close with just a request. If your company is engaged in agriculture, partner with your farmers, invest in them, come to the table and help them improve their sustainability and your own supply chains. If you aren't connected to agriculture, there's a lot of other opportunities shown on this slide here and that I mentioned and can talk with you more about how you might improve your company's sustainability, the Bay's sustainability, our planet's sustainability. And I would love to hear from you and talk more if we don't have an opportunity to answer any questions during the session's panel conversation. I also include here Amy Jacobs, who's our agriculture director, her email, if you'd like to reach out directly to her on anything specific on agriculture. With that, Bruce, I'll stop sharing and thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Mark. And I saw Susan posted that Maryland farmers lead the nation in the use of cover crops. So that's interesting statistics and great to know. So I'm going to introduce Toni McCrory with Walmart. She's the Senior Director of Walmart's U.S. Environmental Health and Safety Compliance Organization and leads their Global Water Center for Excellence. In these roles, she focuses on environmental compliance programs for stormwater, water and wastewater, and automotive services around the world, around the nation. Toni has developed and implemented and refined national programs by generating innovative compliance solutions for performance-based contract management, predictive analytics, and for asset management and digital transformation projects. So Toni, give us some insight into what Walmart's doing, which is really cool.
Thank you, Bruce. I'm happy to be with you guys today and share about this exciting project and Walmart's commitment to become a regenerative company that helps people not only live better, but also sustain our planet. So what does this mean though? And I know that Mark shared with us the definition from a big perspective, but for a company, what does this mean? For us, it means that we're dedicated to placing nature and humanity at the center of our business practices. Regenerating means restoring, renewing, and replenishing in addition to conserving. It means adopting regenerative practices in agriculture, forest, and fisheries management while advancing prosperity and equity for customers, associates, and people who participate in our product supply chains. And it means eliminating waste along the product chain and decarbonizing our operations. For more than 15 years, we've been collaborating with others to drive positive impact across global supply chains. Our sustainability efforts prioritize people and the planet by aiming to source responsibly, eliminate waste and emissions, sell sustainable products, and protect and restore nature. Specifically, we focus on 4 key areas: climate, nature, waste, and people in supply chains. We understand healthy societies, resilient economies, and thriving businesses rely on nature to provide food, products, and services. Studies point to how nature can provide around 1/3 of the solution to climate change. But without action, resources could become too expensive to produce. Natural services we all rely on, like water purification, crop pollination, and disease control, could all be at risk. We also understand that no one solution will solve all of these issues, but we must start somewhere. In 2005, Walmart and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation teamed up to establish the Acres for America program to conserve at least 1 acre of natural habitat for every acre of land developed by the company in the US. Since 2005, this leading public-private land conservation partnership has conserved more than 1.6 million acres of land through 100 projects in over 40 states, protecting critical wildlife habitat and offering local communities increased public access to enjoy the outdoors. More recently, in 2020, Walmart and the Walmart Foundation set a goal to help protect, manage, or restore at least 50 million acres of land and 1 million square miles of ocean by 2030. This is great, but where do you start? Well, today I'd like to share an example of a public-private partnership that's making a difference for Walmart and for the Bay. In 2017, Walmart connected with the Nature Conservancy and RTC to undertake a unique partnership in the Chesapeake Bay. Alongside US EPA Region 3, Maryland Department of the Environment, and Maryland Department of Transportation. The idea was simple enough, even though this chart doesn't merely make that clear. We wanted to create a joint venture with TNC and Opti that would design and construct the projects on Walmart properties. Opti's got the technology, TNC helped us find the capital, and then we, Walmart, have the infrastructure with thousands of regularly maintained ponds nationwide that are just sitting there. The constructed enhancements generate excess stormwater treatment capacity and therefore credits that can be sold to those challenged to meet their permit requirements. In this project, the purchaser was Maryland DOT through their Environmental Services Division. So what exactly are these enhancements and how do they positively impact the environment? The extra water quality treatment is generated through continuous monitoring and adaptive control, also known as CMAQ technology. You can see here, this is a usual pond without the technology. But with CMAQ technology, real-time forecast monitoring and on-site conditions that are known are used to adaptively hold and release water in the pond to maximize the water quality benefits and reduce flooding. The valve is closed prior to a rain event occurring. The water level then rises and holds until the program valve is open to release the cleaner water over time, thereby restoring more of the natural hydrology as well. The water quality benefits are evident not only visually in the reduction of total suspended solids, but also in the reduced nutrient loading. As you can see, the water released from a CMAQ pond is much cleaner than a traditional outlet. Some of you may be asking though, what's in it for Walmart? I think that's a fair question. It wouldn't be good practice to participate in a project that you don't benefit from in some manner, and it definitely wouldn't be sustainable. In this partnership, we take assets we already maintain, the joint venture enhances them, and then our portion of the credit sale offsets a portion of our expense to continue providing that maintenance. Our ponds become smarter, and we have access to real-time information through the Opti dashboard to optimize our maintenance service frequencies. And then this continues for this project over a 20-year time span, benefiting the communities in which we operate with a reduction in non-point source pollution into the local waterways for decades to come. All of this results in what we've come to term a win-win-win scenario. For this particular project, I'm happy to share we've generated 80+ certified credits through enhancement of ponds at our Hagerstown, Aberdeen, and Fruitland, Maryland locations. You can see here the before and after of what it looks like on our Hagerstown site. We anticipate future partnerships, but we also know that the same solutions won't work in every instance. We've seen this already in other completed projects with our Ellicott City facility in Howard County and Hanover location in Anne Arundel County. They were different agreements, but still achieved the same great results. But you can also see we've barely touched the surface on our assets within the Bay and beyond. I won't tell you that this is an easy process. It's a pretty complex problem we're trying to solve. However, so long as our end goals center on reduction of non-point source pollution and building regenerative practices into our watersheds, then I believe we will succeed in delivering on our mission. And that's worth any challenge in my mind. For those of you listening in today from the private sector, I really want to encourage you to engage. Find a way to turn your footprint into part of the solution. Find partners to engage with in the public sector and the nonprofits. JaLeesa and Mark have been great partners. You'll be amazed at the results you can achieve together. And I'm proud of the difference Walmart is making and look forward to identifying more solutions and partnerships in the future. Walmart's taking a holistic approach to bring about system-wide change, but no one company, sector, or individual can do this alone. It will take each of us individually and collectively taking courageous action now to create regenerative future that is more sustainable, healthier, cleaner, inclusive, and equitable. And I'm honored to be on this journey with all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Toni. And I'm interested because I know so many companies have ESG, right? Environmental, societal, and governance requirements. And you can stop sharing too. So I'm just wondering how this fits into Walmart's ESG strategy.
Yeah, so like I said, we are on a journey and there's no one project that's going to fit into all of those ESG goals that we have out there. But for us, starting with the compliant organization, that's the starting point. And then once we've been able to prove that we're compliant with those regulations, then we can start branching out into these innovative solutions. This is just one piece of the pie along the way for us, but we know that we can expand it into other areas beyond the Bay. And we're really looking forward to finding those opportunities. And so that's why I'm so glad to get to share and connect with people through outreach events like this.
Yeah, but I'm going to ask Mark and JaLeesa to join us as well. And yeah, I can just imagine if every business could do just a little bit, just the amplification of that would be amazing, right? And so, JaLeesa, I'm going to start with you too. When we talk a lot about the private sector and those kinds of things. So, when you're trying to work with the private sector, what are the challenges for the agency?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And we experienced a lot of that this year as we were preparing for that BRIC program. So number one, like as a government entity, right, we have to be very mindful that we're never promoting like one private entity over the other. So I say that's kind of like my first barrier, is making sure that we are approaching those conversations still in a very equitable manner and finding those partnerships. And then I would say the second thing is ensuring that we are identifying like the benefits of all of the entities that are involved. So if we're trying to build a partnership between the state, a local community, and a private entity, I want to make sure that that is a project that, number one, we have actual buy-in from all of those entities. So everybody, is able to accomplish their goals within that project. And I would say, I think one of the biggest hurdles for me right now is trying to find how much flexibility we have and then still being able to adhere to everybody's guidelines or requirements. So for instance, I said I administer some FEMA programs. Again, those programs, they have very kind of set in stone deadlines, and they're also not the quickest turnaround either. So those programs take about 2 years from the time that we identify projects until money is released. private sector entities move a lot quicker than that generally. So it also does take a lot of expectation management to ensure that people know, like, if you're signing on to do the project, we are looking for you to be there like for the long haul, and that it won't be something that pays off immediately. So it's like that delayed gratification a little bit. So those are definitely some of the challenges that we encounter when building those public-private relationships.
Right. So Mark, I mean, you take the big picture of the Chesapeake and everything that goes into the Chesapeake, and you've been into this intimately. Tell us, what is the future? What do you think is going to happen with the Chesapeake Bay?
Well, if you couldn't tell from my presentation, Bruce, I'm an optimist at heart. And I think one of the reasons is the conversation we're having this morning. So this is a really big place with a lot of people, and each of the three of our stories are sort of touching on different elements of what a big place it is, and solving big problems like water quality in the biggest estuary in North America requires complex partnerships with a lot of different types of people. And so the examples that each of us have given, and I have 3 or 4, 10, 20 more of those to share, really gives me hope that there is a future for the health of the Bay. Like I said in my slides, the water quality is getting better. We're not where we need to be, but we sort of know what we need to do. And now, to JaLeesa's point that she just made, can we take the time to listen to one another? We have in the case of agriculture or stormwater or emergency management, there's a lot of different sectors and communities coming together, all of whom have their own goals and interests. And in my experience, especially working on the Bay for the last 12 or 15 years, if we take the time up front to learn each other's language, to learn each other's goals, and then seek a solution that works for everybody, we get really big things done. But it takes time, to JaLeesa's point. You have to be patient.
All right, let's put some bookends on this. If I had, I'm not going to say like $1 billion, but let's say $10 million.
Yeah.
If you sat back today and say, here's $10 million, Mark, what would you do? What would be like how you would invest that?
Is that an offer, Bruce?
Let's see. We got the grant program from JaLeesa.
Yeah. Well, the first thing as a nonprofit person, what you think about is how can I match that money with government programs, like JaLeesa said. So when I think about, in particular, private funds, you look at ways to expand the impact of that by bringing other funding together, particularly government funding. One of the biggest issues in the Chesapeake right now, and probably what I would answer first, is Pennsylvania. Many folks on the phone who are in Maryland, I'm sure, have read this in the paper. We have a long way to go in making progress, particularly in Pennsylvania, just north of Maryland. A lot of work in agriculture. Here's the good news for that. We know I mentioned before, we know what we need to do. We need to create the economic incentives for farmers to want to participate. That includes both financial assistance, but also technical assistance. Many of these farmers may not know how to use particular programs. So some of that money would go to people talking with farmers, but also some financial incentives too.
So we want to make Pennsylvania the second largest use of cover crops, right?
Exactly.
Behind Maryland.
Yeah, we have a ways to go. We would love to see that kind of adoption rate in our friends to the north, Bruce.
But the other end of the spectrum is me. Yeah. Every individual in Maryland and in this watershed area, what would you say what's the biggest impact that we can make on the Chesapeake?
Right. I loved what Toni said at the end, because I think what she said applies to corporations, applies to individuals. Look at your own individual footprint, whether that's your yard, whether that's what you buy on a daily basis, the activities that you conduct in just living your life. There are lots of different ways that you can contribute to reducing that impact, to making your own solutions regenerative. Whether it's looking at where water runs off of your lawn and how you might stop that. Whether it's supporting local agriculture. I feel fortunate to be able to buy local oysters from Maryland You know, particularly during COVID times. There's so many different ways that you can get engaged.
So Toni, on that point, you know, Walmart are big facilities, big parking lots, right? Large impervious areas. Are you doing anything about runoff as well? Or is that what those holding ponds are doing? Is you're just funneling everything to the holding ponds? Is that?
So it definitely depends on the site. I'll say
Sure, sure.
Walmart is like any other Walmart out there.
Yeah.
Even though it may look like that from inside the box, outside is definitely different. We have a lot of different treatment trains out there and treatment train approaches depending on the site. But for these particular locations, town, for example, we have some bioretention as well. So it's going through bioretention facilities, and then it's going into the detention pond, actually converting it to a short-term retention pond where it's holding, allowing that pollution to settle out, hold on site, and then over time metering that water back into the local waterways that we connect to. So every site's different, but the great thing that I love about what we've been able to create in our Walmart stormwater program is practices to ensure that we're picking up, that we're providing maintenance, that we're removing sediment and disposing properly off-site, and that we're actively engaged with these systems to reduce the amount of nutrients that are leaving our site, pollution that's leaving our site.
In the previous part, we had a company from the Netherlands called Urban Rain Shell, which actually takes that runoff water and puts it into essentially a shell-based filtering system and driving it right back into the aquifer, you know, into the soil. So really absorbing that rather than having just a staged runoff to actually bring that water back and filter it at the same time. So you might want to just take a peek at that. JaLeesa, obviously grants are interesting. Like, what are we talking about as far as like the value, you know, like, are they $10,000 grants? Are they $1 million grants? How is that working?
So it's a wide range. So we have definitely implemented
that was a wide range.
Implemented like smaller projects around $10,000 for some of our rural communities, like the city of Crisfield in a coastal area of Maryland. But with the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, the threshold is $50 million for an individual project. And that's only 75% of the projects are funded with the federal funding. So you can still have a project that's much larger than that, but that $50 million can really serve as the catalyst for other investments like Mark was saying earlier. And so there are examples just around the country of that. And one project we're really excited about that we've submitted to that BRIC program last year is a project to revitalize the Middle Branch area within Baltimore City. And so it is one of the most, I'll say, environmentally valuable areas within the city of Baltimore. And so with that, they've applied for the federal funding, but they have private investment, community investment, city investment. And so I think that that project is really a real good demonstration of like how successful we can be when we do partner together.
Great. So Rebecca posted a question, Mark. Do you have any reports or statistics to show the improvement of carbon absorption in soil and water holding with specific solutions? What kind of solutions have been implemented? There you go.
Thank you. It's a great question, Rebecca. I was deciding whether I was going to answer it live or type, and I started typing, and I thought
I think it'd be easier live.
To answer. Thank you. Yeah. So the answer to that is yes, and it varies. You know, Toni, to Toni's point about each pond being different, because soils are different all over Maryland, all over the Chesapeake, all over the country and world. The amount of carbon and water that those soils can store varies. The good news is we can improve them in any situation, whether they're sandy soils on the Eastern Shore or clayey soils and, you know, around DC where we live here. There are things that you can do to improve that. And there are lots of reports, Rebecca. There's a Healthy Soils Initiative that's led by the Maryland Department of Agriculture right now that's looking to expand the water holding and carbon holding capacity of soils in Maryland, looking to really drive the implementation of these practices in agricultural lands. And there's lots of data. If you want to email me, I can send you some reports with lots of details if you'd like them. I probably don't have time in 5 minutes to share all the details.
Oh, Rebecca is definitely the curious one. She's posted another question, JaLeesa, regarding the risk analysis. And do you have any specific tool that you're using for risk analysis in your work?
Yeah, so we use ArcGIS, obviously, a great deal to do all of our analysis. But I think one of the really unique things about MEMA is that about 3 years ago, we actually stood up an entire risk analysis branch within our agency. So we have 5 dedicated analysts that operate on a 365, 24/7 basis. So we do real-time analysis. So that means if we say the National Weather Service is, issuing an advisory, a fog advisory, those analysts then go back and say, okay, well, typically when we have a fog advisory, these are a lot of the roadways or intersections where we are seeing accidents. So we can feed that information to the local communities and say, hey, you might want to send some, first responders to this area or put out some signage within this area so that we can start reducing the potential risk in those areas. So I like to say that's our real-time.
Yeah, I was going to say that's your risk tool.
Yeah.
You have a whole team.
Yeah. And then the long-term thing is that we do a hazard identification and risk assessment for our state level hazard mitigation plan. So then that really does start to look at, okay, what does it look like for droughts, land movement, coastal hazards? And so from that, we have a formula that we utilize that takes into account population and all these other factors.
Sure.
And from there, we basically develop our mitigation strategy for how we want to address those risks.
Great. Thank you. And Toni, it's great to see what Walmart's doing. And I know there's even more around the gas stations and other things, and you're a great partner to this community. So thank you for that. All of you for attending. And I'll turn the session back over to Jen, and we will close out part 3 and look forward to part 4. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you guys so much. Such great presentations, so interesting. And thank you, Bruce, for moderating again. And as Bruce mentioned earlier, on Wednesday, May 19th at 11 a.m., WTCI is hosting its 4th and final installment of Innovations in Protecting the World's Water Supply, focusing on water risk and the power of action. So joining us will be Andrea Erickson Querez, who is the Managing Director for Water Security at the Nature Conservancy, as well as Jonathan Radke, who is the Water Resource Sustainability Director at Coca-Cola, Nabia Ofosu-Ama, who is the Senior Corporate Engagement Advisor of Global Water at the Nature Conservancy, and Shannon Quinn, who is the Global Water Stewardship Leader at Procter & Gamble. So the speakers will discuss the role that water scarcity plays in business and the power that corporations have to address the issue through collaboration, partnerships, and understanding their own risk profile of water. So please visit our website at wtci.org/agile to register. So now I'd like to make an important announcement for the Maryland Department of Commerce, the Netherlands Water Partnership, and Baltimore Rotterdam sister cities who've played an integral part in this program. So the state of Maryland has a memorandum of understanding with the province of South Holland in the Netherlands, the province where the cities of Rotterdam and The Hague are located. And the collaboration is focused on cybersecurity and life sciences and health, and it is expanded to include water management, green tech, and agri-tech. South Holland serves as a gateway for Maryland companies to Europe, and Maryland serves as a gateway for Dutch companies to the US. Companies can partner to cooperatively address many issues that are of concern to both regions. Companies can benefit from soft landing programs to help them expand to each region. The Netherlands Water Partnership is an organization based in The Hague for Dutch water management companies and research institutes. And in January 2021, Maryland and the Netherlands Water Partnership, together with other organizations like Baltimore, Rotterdam, sister cities, held a joint conference on climate resilience, which addressed issues with rising seas and flooding. And participants included representatives from the public and private sectors. So this conference initiated an increased level of activity between the two regions to work together in areas regarding water resources and finding nature-based solutions for flood management. So if you're a Maryland company that would like to expand to Europe via the Netherlands, or if you are a Dutch company interested in expanding to the US via Maryland, contact Andrew Krynick at the Maryland Department of Commerce. Maryland and the province of South Holland both offer tailored business soft landing programs that help your company make the move overseas. So that concludes our session. We hope you enjoyed it, and thanks so much for joining us. And we look forward to hosting you again on May 19th.